The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, a low hum of anticipation that seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden rectangles on the polished wood floor, yet even the warmth of the morning light failed to reach the tension clinging to the air. Families, journalists, and a scattering of law enforcement personnel filled the benches, all waiting for something, though none could say exactly what. There was a sense that history, or at least a story that would be told and retold, was about to unfold here. 7-year-old Avery Matthews stood just inside the doorway, her small hand gripping the strap of a worn denim jacket that hung loosely over her shoulders. The jacket was far too big for her, swallowing her tiny frame, but she hadn't minded. It offered comfort, like a protective cocoon she could hide inside. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose braid, and her wide, hazel eyes scanned the room with a mixture of fear and caution. She hadn't spoken to a single adult since the night the police had rescued her, and even now, she clutched the edge of the jacket as though it were the only solid thing in a chaotic world. The judge, an older man with a kind but authoritative presence, watched her with quiet concern. He had dealt with countless children over his decades on the bench, but something about Avery's demeanor made him pause. She was small, fragile-looking, and yet there was an unmistakable fire behind her eyes, a fierce, silent determination that demanded recognition. He gave a slight nod to the bailiffs, signaling them to allow her to take her place. At the front of the courtroom lay Kato, the police K-9 who had been brought in for support. The dog's massive frame was calm, almost statuesque, yet even from a distance, one could sense the alertness coiled beneath his fur. Kato was more than a pet or a companion. He was a trained officer, trained to read people, to sense danger, to react to the faintest signals of fear, distress, or urgency. And in Avery's eyes, he seemed to embody safety. Her gaze locked onto him immediately. The courtroom around her faded. Attorneys and journalists, the accused and the victims' families, the judge and the officers, all became peripheral shadows as Avery focused entirely on the dog. Slowly, she began to walk forward, small steps that seemed to echo in the hushed room. Each footfall was deliberate, as if she were crossing a bridge suspended over a deep, invisible chasm. People held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Witnesses and court personnel exchanged glances, whispering to each other. "Do you think she'll talk?" one asked quietly. Another shook their head. "She's never spoken since the rescue," came the reply. Avery reached Kato's side and hesitated, bending her knees slightly to lower herself closer to his level. The dog's golden-brown eyes met hers, steady and reassuring, and she felt a strange comfort in that gaze, as though he understood every unspoken thought and fear swirling in her mind. She stretched out her tiny hand and brushed it against the coarse fur behind his ears. The courtroom remained silent, the anticipation palpable. It was as if everyone knew something extraordinary was about to occur, but couldn't yet see it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Avery's lips moved slightly, forming words that the human ears around her could not catch. Her voice was a faint whisper, too soft for the microphones to register. Yet the impact of those words was instantaneous. Kato's ears pricked up, his posture stiffening with sudden attention. The dog's eyes darted toward the courtroom, scanning every corner as though he had just been given a signal no one else could perceive. Sergeant Collins, Kato's handler, stiffened. He had worked with the dog for years and knew every nuance of his behavior, every subtle twitch or tilt of his head. What he was seeing now was different, urgent, alarmed, yet precise. He stepped forward, lowering his voice, and whispered to the judge, "Your Honor, the child just communicated something. To Kato, something important." The judge's eyes widened, and the tension in the room thickened. Attorneys froze mid-note, reporters fumbled with their recorders, and the accused, seated at the defense table, noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy. He tilted his head, curiosity and slight irritation etched across his face. Collins knelt beside Avery, keeping his tone calm but serious. "Did you tell Kato the truth?" he asked softly. Avery didn't speak, only nodded, pressing her face briefly against the dog's fur for reassurance. Colin's jaw tightened as he interpreted the gesture. Whatever Avery had just communicated in her whisper wasn't random. It was intentional, urgent, and precise. He looked toward the officers stationed around the room and signaled them with a barely perceptible movement. A murmur ran through the spectators. Many had never seen anything like this in a courtroom before. A child, silent for days, communicating critical information through a police dog. The situation was extraordinary, almost surreal, yet there was an unmistakable gravity to it. The air seemed to hum with the weight of the revelation, and no one dared speak or move unnecessarily. Avery slowly straightened, though she remained close to Kato. The dog sat back slightly, maintaining eye contact with her, tail flicking with controlled energy. Collins remained close, whispering quietly, his hand ready to steady the girl if needed. "We need to act carefully," he said under his breath to the officers. "She's pointing us to something. I don't know what yet, but it's serious." Meanwhile, the defendant's posture shifted. The man's eyes narrowed, scanning the room. Something in Avery's interaction with the dog unsettled him. He fidgeted in his seat, adjusting his tie, a thin sheen of sweat forming on his forehead. The subtle panic was barely perceptible, but it was enough to catch the attention of anyone paying close attention. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to maintain control of the courtroom. "Let's proceed cautiously," he instructed. "Child safety is our utmost priority." The officers nodded, and the courtroom seemed to stretch and contract with every heartbeat, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Avery bent slightly, whispering again into Kato's ear. The dog's reaction was immediate, a low growl, eyes narrowing, muscles coiling like springs ready to launch. Collins stepped closer, understanding now that this was more than a simple reassurance. This was a signal of danger, a warning the child couldn't voice aloud. Journalists tried to capture the moment, but cameras and microphones could not contain the electricity in the room. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, unable to tear their eyes away from the small, silent exchange. It was a performance of courage and instinct, a tableau that would haunt those who witnessed it for years to come. Avery straightened, taking a small, steadying breath. Her eyes never left Kato's. In that instant, it was clear to everyone watching. She was no longer just a frightened little girl. She was a messenger, a guide, and perhaps the only person who could prevent what was about to unfold. The judge exchanged a tense glance with the officers. Collins whispered something brief into the dog's ear, and Kato moved closer to Avery, a protective barrier as much as a partner in deciphering her secret message. The courtroom's atmosphere had shifted from suspense to a palpable sense of imminent revelation. Something hidden was about to be exposed, and Avery, silent and trembling, was at the center of it all. And in that hushed, sunlit courtroom, with every eye fixed on the pair, the first thread of the story that would captivate everyone from law enforcement to the public had begun to unravel. The tension in the courtroom hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown heavier, a weight pressing down on everyone present. After the silence that followed Avery's first whispered words to Kato, the spectators had leaned forward instinctively, drawn by a sense of something extraordinary unfolding before their eyes. Adults who prided themselves on control, on understanding, now realized they were entirely at the mercy of a 7-year-old's silent communication and a dog's uncanny perception. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fear. Avery remained kneeling beside Kato, her small hand resting lightly on his fur as if seeking reassurance from the only being she trusted in this room. The dog's large eyes were locked on her face, ears alert, tail still but tense. It was clear to anyone watching that Kato understood something no human had yet comprehended. Sergeant Collins, Kato's handler, knelt beside them, his eyes scanning the room while his mind raced. He had worked with Kato for years, and he knew when the dog's focus was ordinary and when it was extraordinary. This was the latter. Avery leaned closer to the dog, whispering words so soft that the microphones and the human ear alike could not capture them. A strange hush fell over the courtroom. Even the stenographer paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, sensing that something critical had just occurred. Cato's head tilted slightly at first, a subtle acknowledgement, and then the dog stiffened. His ears perked, nostrils flared, and his gaze snapped toward the defense table. The reaction was so precise, so immediate, that Colin's heart skipped a beat. He knew the significance instantly. The words Avery had spoken were not mere fragments of imagination or play. They were a signal, a warning, a coded message. The dog's body language, rigid, alert, purposeful, was a reaction to danger, or at least the presence of someone she feared. Colin's experience told him this wasn't the type of alert that could be feigned or imagined. Whatever Avery had whispered, it was vital, and it involved the man sitting at the defense table. Collins took a breath and whispered to the judge, "Your Honor, the child has communicated something through Cato. I believe it's urgent. We may need to take immediate precautions." The judge's eyes widened slightly and he leaned forward, a frown creasing his forehead. "Explain," he asked cautiously. "I've never encountered anything like this in my courtroom." Collins nodded. "I know it sounds unusual, sir, but Cato is trained to detect both verbal and nonverbal cues from victims, particularly children. He's reacting to what she just said. I believe she's indicating the presence of a threat, someone here in the courtroom. It's possible the child can't say it aloud, but she's giving us the message through the dog." Murmurs rippled across the room. Attorneys exchanged incredulous glances, reporters adjusted their cameras and microphones, and the defendant leaned back in his chair, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The man's demeanor shifted subtly, though he tried to mask it with forced indifference. It was almost imperceptible, but Collins, trained to read human behavior as precisely as he read Cato, noticed instantly. Avery pressed her small face closer to Cato's side, still whispering. This time the dog's reaction intensified. His body tense like a drawn bow, eyes darting between Avery, the exits, and the defense table. Collins crouched even lower, voice calm but urgent. "We need to pay attention," he said softly to the officers around him. "She's pointing us to something serious. Stay alert." The judge raised an eyebrow, visibly torn between maintaining order and acknowledging the unusual circumstances. "Proceed cautiously," he instructed. "Child safety is paramount." Collins signaled to the officers. They began to subtly shift positions, moving closer to the exits, keeping a discreet but watchful eye on the defendant. No one wanted to cause panic, but they understood the importance of the situation. Avery's whispered words had triggered a chain reaction, one that could reveal danger no one yet understood. Finally, Avery leaned back slightly, her lips curling into the faintest trace of a smile, though tension still clouded her features. Cato's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, as if he alone held the key to deciphering her message. Collins, understanding instinctively, repeated the words she had whispered to the dog, two simple words, loaded with meaning. "He's here." The impact was immediate. "He's here." Collins could feel the weight of those words settle over the courtroom like a physical force. The meaning was unmistakable. The threat, the danger, was present in the very room they occupied. The defendant's subtle signs of anxiety had been real. Avery had detected it and had communicated it through the only method she felt safe using. The courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. Where there had been quiet curiosity, now there was tension, palpable and electric. Every adult present felt it, from the judge to the journalists, even the spectators. It was the kind of moment that froze time, where every heartbeat seemed amplified and every second stretched taut with anticipation. Collins rose slightly, keeping one hand near Cato's collar. "Your Honor, I recommend a temporary pause," he said. "We need to evaluate this situation before proceeding. I believe the child is pointing us to an immediate risk." The judge nodded and a tense hush enveloped the courtroom. Bailiffs began to gently guide spectators back from the front benches, keeping them at a safe distance. Attorneys whispered to one another, faces pale and eyes wide. Avery, meanwhile, remained with Kato, her small hand still resting lightly on his side. The dog's growl was low now, barely audible, but it carried weight. The defendant's eyes flickered around the room. He tried to mask his fear with a neutral expression, but his body language betrayed him. His hands tightened around the edge of the table, his jaw muscles working, subtle beads of sweat forming along his temple. Collins observed silently, heart pounding. He knew that whatever Avery had sensed was not imagined. It was real, immediate, and dangerous. Avery's eyes, wide and intense, never left Kato's. She leaned forward slightly again, and this time the dog shifted, stepping protectively between her and the rest of the courtroom. His movements were precise, measured, and authoritative. Every observer could sense the unspoken command. "Do not approach." Collins knelt again, whispering instructions to Kato, who responded with barely a motion, guided by Avery's message. The courtroom held its collective breath. Every adult understood that something critical was happening, something that could alter the outcome of the trial and potentially save lives. The whispers that had filled the air earlier had vanished completely. Even reporters, trained to capture every dramatic moment, remained silent, cameras lowered, pens still. Collins' voice cut softly through the tension. "We need to secure the area and approach the defendant carefully. I believe the child's 2 words indicate that the person we're most concerned about is seated right there." He gestured subtly toward the defendant, whose posture was now visibly strained. Avery leaned fully into Kato, her small frame trembling slightly, but she was no longer frozen with fear. There was purpose in her movements, clarity in her silence. She had chosen Kato as her messenger because she trusted him, because she knew he would act on the truth she could not speak aloud. And that trust, visible to every observer, added to the intensity of the moment. The judge raised his gavel slightly, a silent acknowledgement that extraordinary measures were about to be taken. Bailiffs and officers moved with coordinated precision, encircling the defendant without alarming the child or the audience. Kato's presence added both comfort and authority, a bridge between the child's vulnerability and the adult world of law and enforcement. Avery's whispered words, the 2 simple yet loaded words, "He's here," had transformed the atmosphere. What began as a tense courtroom session had evolved into a living, breathing drama. Every participant was acutely aware that the child and the dog had shifted the balance of control. Danger was imminent, and all eyes now focused on the defendant, whose panic, subtle but unmistakable, betrayed him. Collins, sensing the escalating threat, signaled to the officers again. Their movements were precise, rehearsed, and cautious. Avery remained kneeling, the center of the room's attention, her whisper having ignited the chain of events. The tension was thick, almost tangible, and every observer could feel that the story unfolding before them was far from ordinary. And in that moment the courtroom realized it. Avery's 2 words had not only warned of immediate danger, they had set in motion a series of actions that would reveal truths no one expected, truths that could change the outcome of the case entirely. The world seemed to pause, waiting for the next move in a story written not in words, but in trust, instinct, and courage. The courtroom seemed suspended in time, each observer caught between disbelief and rising panic. Avery remained kneeling beside Kato, her small frame pressed against the dog's powerful side as though drawing courage from his presence. The whispers, the slight trembles of fear, the tension radiating from every adult, it all melted into silence as Sergeant Collins took in what he had just witnessed. Kato's reaction had been instantaneous, precise, and unyielding. His muscles were taut, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring, and eyes locked on the defendant with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. Collins understood instantly. This was no ordinary alert. The dog was interpreting Avery's whispered message, a message she could not voice aloud, a warning only he could comprehend. Collins knelt down beside Avery, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Avery," he said softly, "did you tell Kato the truth?" She nodded, tiny fingers gripping the dog's collar, trembling slightly, but her gaze never wavered. Collins' heart pounded. He had handled countless tense situations over his years in the force, but nothing compared to this. A child, a dog, and an invisible threat that might be sitting right in the courtroom. He whispered the words back to the judge, careful to maintain discretion. "Your Honor," she said, "he's here. That means the threat, the suspect, is present. We need to proceed cautiously." The judge's face betrayed a mixture of skepticism and growing concern. "I need confirmation," he said, voice steady but cautious. "This is unusual. A child and a dog cannot substitute for evidence." Collins inclined his head respectfully. "I understand, sir, but Kato is trained to detect behavioral and verbal cues, especially from children who have experienced trauma. Avery's reaction is precise, deliberate, and alarming. I would advise immediate precautionary measures. The defendant sitting there could be a danger, and the child has given us a critical warning." Murmurs rose among spectators. Reporters tilted their cameras, trying to capture every expression. Attorneys whispered frantically among themselves, while the defendant's composure began to crack. His eyes flickered to Avery and Kato, the slightest hint of unease crossing his carefully maintained mask of indifference. His fingers tapped nervously against the table, jaw tightening minutely. It was subtle, but Collins saw it. He had trained for situations like this, and the signs were unmistakable. Panic. Avery pressed closer to Kato's side, whispering again. The dog's reaction intensified. His growl was low but warning enough that the judge, the officers, and the spectators could feel the tension. Kato wasn't just alert, he was directing attention toward the threat. Collins, interpreting the dog's behavior, realized that the next steps had to be both strategic and immediate. Every second mattered. He gestured discreetly to the officers, signaling them to tighten their formation without alarming the public. They shifted subtly, closing the exits, positioning themselves around the room in anticipation. Collins leaned closer to Avery, placing a gentle hand on her small shoulder. "Stay calm," he whispered. "You've done everything right. We're going to handle this carefully." The defendant shifted again, glancing nervously at the officers moving into position. There was a slight tremor in his hands now, and his eyes darted from the judge to Avery and Kato. Collins noted the change immediately. Avery had detected something he hadn't even realized was happening: fear and guilt. That realization gave him the clarity he needed. He spoke softly to the judge again, outlining the precise steps they needed to take. "Sir, we need a temporary recess. I want to secure the child first, then address the defendant. His behavior, combined with Avery's communication, indicates immediate risk. Kato's training supports this conclusion." The judge hesitated, glancing at the crowded room. The murmurs grew louder, but the weight of Avery's silent warning and Kato's reaction was undeniable. Finally, he nodded. "Take precautions," he ordered, voice firm. "Ensure the safety of the child and all present." Collins rose, signaling the officers. They moved with precision, their steps measured but swift. Bailiffs gently guided spectators away from the front benches, creating a protective barrier around Avery. She remained with Kato, kneeling, whispering as though in a private conversation. The dog's growl and alert posture reassured her while simultaneously warning anyone else not to approach. Collins observed, heart racing. The entire situation was unprecedented, yet he had to maintain control. The defendant shifted in his chair, now clearly aware that something was happening. Collins could see his unease morph into outright panic, though he attempted to hide it behind a facade of indifference. His eyes flicked repeatedly between Avery, Kato, and the officers. Every instinct Collins had told him that the man knew he had been detected. Avery leaned into Kato again, whispering the same words once more. "He's here." The dog seemed to echo silently through his body language. Collins interpreted the subtle cues. The dog was signaling that the danger was present, precise, and immediate. There was no room for hesitation. Collins gave a small nod to the officers. They moved discreetly but swiftly, encircling the defendant while keeping their actions controlled. The courtroom was tense. Every observer held their breath. The air was thick with anticipation and the unspoken understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding. A 7-year-old child, a dog, and a hidden threat in plain sight. The defendant's attempts to remain calm were failing. His breathing quickened, eyes flicking toward the judge and the exits, hands twisting nervously. The smallest bead of sweat rolled down his temple, yet he remained seated, frozen by the sudden awareness that he had been detected. Cato's steady presence and Avery's unwavering gaze had exposed him, and there was no place to hide. Collins knelt briefly, whispering into Cato's ear. The dog responded instantly, shifting his body to block the defendant, signaling officers to move in. The child's 2 words had transformed into an operational directive: protect, alert, and control. Avery's fear was palpable, but so was her courage. She had trusted Cato to act, and now he had. The courtroom was silent, the audience unable to tear their eyes away from the tableau. Journalists recorded every detail, yet their cameras and microphones could not fully capture the gravity of what was occurring. This was beyond reporting. It was living history unfolding before their eyes. Collins signaled to a nearby officer. "Approach slowly. Keep him seated. No sudden movements. We maintain control and the child stays safe." The officer nodded, understanding that the situation demanded precision, restraint, and the utmost care. Avery's whispered words, the 2 words she had spoken earlier, had ignited this entire chain of action. The dog's reaction, combined with the subtle but undeniable cues from the defendant, created a scenario where every movement had to be calculated. Yet even as tension reached its peak, Collins noted Avery's small hand resting calmly on Cato's side, her trust unwavering. The judge, observing from his bench, nodded slightly, recognizing the necessity of the measures. He glanced at Avery and Cato, understanding that they were the catalysts for this intervention. The courtroom, once filled with murmurs and shifting attention, was now still, each person aware that a single whispered message had altered everything. Collins maintained his focus, issuing quiet instructions to the officers while ensuring Avery remained calm. Cato growled softly, a controlled warning that echoed the gravity of the situation. The dog's body language was clear. The threat was present, the child's message had been received, and immediate action was required. Every second felt stretched, suspended in tension. The defendant's panic became increasingly apparent, subtle cues amplified by the presence of Cato and Avery's unwavering attention. Collins recognized the moment for what it was, a convergence of instinct, trust, and courage. A child, a dog, and trained law enforcement were now united in a silent yet profound communication. The whispered 2 words, "He's here," had not only revealed the immediate danger, but they had also demonstrated a remarkable truth. Even the smallest voice, when trusted and understood, could command action and bring clarity to chaos. Collins rose, signaling for a careful, controlled approach to secure the defendant while keeping Avery safe. Cato shifted slightly, blocking any sudden movements and maintaining eye contact with Avery. Every officer in the room followed the precise instructions, aware that this was a moment none would ever forget. And in that courtroom, bathed in sunlight yet heavy with tension, the significance of a child's 2 whispered words became undeniable. The handler reacted, the dog responded, and the courtroom was transformed from a place of passive observation into a stage of courage, instinct, and imminent action. What Avery had communicated through Cato would set in motion a chain of events that no one in that room would ever forget. The courtroom was taut with anticipation, every heartbeat amplified in the silence that had overtaken the once busy room. Officers stood poised, ready for any movement, their eyes scanning the defendant and the exits. Avery remained kneeling beside Cato, small hands pressed to his fur, whispering softly. Her trust in the dog was absolute, and he responded with the unwavering focus of a trained officer who understood the urgency of her message. The entire room had shifted, no longer ordinary spectators to a trial, but participants in a tense and delicate drama unfolding in real time. Collins had positioned himself slightly behind Avery, ready to protect her while simultaneously monitoring the defendant. The man sat rigid, his fingers curling around the edge of the table. The slight tremor in his hands betrayed the calm he attempted to project. Beads of sweat had formed along his hairline, and his gaze darted nervously toward the judge, the officers, and most importantly, the child. Collins knew that the next moment could change everything. Any sudden action could escalate into danger. Avery leaned into Kato, whispering once more, her lips barely moving. The dog's low growl vibrated through his massive chest, a controlled warning that resonated with the tension in the room. Every officer and bailiff recognized the significance immediately. This wasn't routine. This was a response to an imminent threat. Collins signaled to the officers discreetly, tightening the perimeter, ensuring that no one could rush the defendant without authorization. Then it happened. The defendant suddenly and violently shot upright in his chair. He shoved back from the table, knocking over a glass of water. His eyes were wide, wild, and filled with panic. "Stay back," he shouted, voice cracking in desperation. The courtroom erupted instantly into chaos. Spectators gasped, some screamed, and a few ducked instinctively behind the benches. Officers shouted commands, moving rapidly to intercept him, but his momentum carried him forward. Kato reacted immediately, stepping between Avery and the defendant. His posture was firm, muscles coiled and ready to act. The low growl escalated, a warning that was both audible and palpable. Avery clutched his collar, trembling but somehow steady. She knew Kato would protect her, that he understood the gravity of her warning, and that he would not fail. Collins moved quickly, placing himself in the perfect position to shield the child and give commands to the officers. The defendant, fueled by panic, grabbed a metal pen from the table, brandishing it like a weapon. His movements were erratic, uncontrolled. Collins' instincts kicked in. "Stop! Drop it!" he shouted, his voice authoritative, cutting through the chaos. But the man's panic was overpowering his logic. He bolted toward the nearest exit, shoving aside anyone who obstructed him. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of movement. Spectators scrambled, attorneys shouted, and officers pursued. Avery pressed herself closer to Kato, burying her face in his fur. She could feel the vibrations of his growl through her tiny hands, reassuring yet warning. She whispered softly, almost inaudibly, as if giving him guidance through instinct. "Kato," responded, darting forward with precision, muscles rippling under his fur. He moved faster than anyone thought possible, tracking the defendant's panicked movements with unerring accuracy. Collins sprinted beside him, radio in hand, issuing coordinated commands to the pursuing officers. The defendant careened through the courthouse hallway, knocking into doors, his attempts to escape frantic and unpredictable. The echo of footsteps, shouts, and alarms created a chaotic symphony of tension. Office workers peeked from behind walls, unsure whether to intervene or flee. Every second was critical. One misstep could lead to disaster. Kato, trained for these exact moments, ignored obstacles, following Avery's whispered signal directly to the fleeing man. Collins could barely keep pace, adrenaline coursing, mind sharp and focused on every possible contingency. At a stairwell, the defendant collided with a heavy door, nearly toppling over. Kato barked sharply, the sound reverberating through the hallway. It was both a warning and a command. Stop now or face consequences. Collins saw the man hesitate for the briefest moment, a flicker of awareness crossing his panic-stricken face. He realized the child's warning had been accurate, the danger was immediate, and Kato's intervention was precise. The dog's presence and training transformed the chaos into a controlled pursuit, a tense ballet of instinct, bravery, and law enforcement coordination. Avery's whispers continued, guiding Kato, offering reassurance in her own fragile voice. Each word, each breath, was interpreted and acted upon by the dog with almost supernatural precision. Collins marveled silently at the synchronization between child and K9, the two of them acting as one in a way that defied ordinary understanding. Every officer involved followed the signals, but none could match the pure instinct driving Kato and Avery together. The defendant barreled down the hallway, heading toward the service entrance of the courthouse. Officers moved swiftly to block his escape, but he twisted, shoving aside the nearest deputy. Kato adjusted, anticipating his moves with a predator's grace. With a single, powerful leap, he intercepted the man, forcing him to the ground without inflicting serious harm. The officer team surged forward, securing him while ensuring Avery remained protected. The tension in the hallway was electric, a culmination of fear, adrenaline, and precise execution. Collins approached Avery, crouching beside her to offer reassurance. She clung to Kato, her breathing still rapid but more controlled now. "It's okay, Avery," he whispered. "You've done everything right. Kato kept you safe, and you gave us the warning we needed." Avery looked up at him, eyes wide but steady, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She had spoken 2 words, and those words had set in motion a chain of events that had prevented what could have been a disaster. The defendant was handcuffed and guided away, the threat neutralized, yet the courtroom remained tense. Spectators slowly began to relax, some crying, some whispering among themselves. Journalists hurriedly captured footage, their cameras shaking from adrenaline as they documented the scene. The bailiffs restored order, and the judge called for a brief recess to allow everyone to recover from the chaos. Collins stood beside Avery, watching her carefully. The child, though small and fragile, had demonstrated extraordinary courage and presence of mind. Her trust in Kato had guided the officers to prevent potential harm, and her calm persistence had allowed the entire situation to unfold without injury. The child had done more than witness the event. She had been a critical agent in its resolution. The judge finally addressed the courtroom, voice steady but solemn. "Thanks to the quick actions of law enforcement and the bravery of a young witness, a dangerous situation has been neutralized. I commend everyone involved." Applause and murmurs of relief filled the room, though the weight of what had just occurred lingered. Avery remained kneeling beside Kato, still whispering softly, as if explaining her role in the crisis to the dog. Collins gently guided her to her feet, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Avery," he said softly. "You helped us all. Kato and you together prevented something terrible." Avery nodded, eyes bright but cautious, absorbing the praise without losing her sense of awe at the chain of events she had set in motion. The officers secured the courtroom, checking for any overlooked hazards, while the defendant was escorted from the building. The courtroom slowly emptied, the atmosphere heavy with a mix of relief and awe. Every observer understood that they had witnessed something remarkable: a child, a dog, and law enforcement working together in perfect, instinctive harmony to avert disaster. Even after the immediate threat was gone, the tension lingered. Avery's 2 whispered words had been the spark, and the reaction of Kato, guided by instinct and training, had been the flame that illuminated the danger and guided the officers' precise actions. No one would forget the scene: the small, trembling child whose silence carried power, the massive dog whose alertness saved lives, and the law enforcement officers whose discipline and trust made it all possible. As the courtroom doors closed behind the last spectators, Collins stayed with Avery and Kato for a moment longer. He knelt beside her, brushing a stray hair from her face. "You were brave," he said gently. "You trusted Kato and told us what we needed to know. You helped save lives today." Avery whispered back, barely audible, "Kato understood me. He always does." Collins smiled, recognizing the profound bond between child and dog, a bond that had prevented tragedy and ensured justice would proceed. And in that quiet, sunlit room, now emptied of chaos, the magnitude of Avery's courage and insight began to settle over everyone who had witnessed it. What had begun as whispers and fear had become an extraordinary demonstration of trust, instinct, and bravery. The child had spoken 2 words, and those words had set into motion a chain of events that no one in the room would ever forget. The courthouse hallways were a chaotic blur of sound and motion. The defendant had bolted, shoving aside anyone who stood in his path, his wild eyes searching for a way out. Officers moved with precision, following his every step, radios crackling, voices shouting clear commands over the din. Avery clung tightly to Cato's side, her small body trembling but her resolve firm. The dog's low growl vibrated through his chest, a steady pulse of power and focus that seemed to reassure her even amidst the chaos. Sergeant Collins sprinted beside Cato, hand on his radio, issuing precise commands to coordinate the pursuit. Team Alpha block the north exit. Team Bravo cover the stairwell. Keep the hallways clear. The officers moved with disciplined precision, each step calculated to prevent the defendant from escaping. Collins kept one eye on Avery, ensuring she remained safe, the other on the panicked man barreling through the courthouse like a wild animal cornered. The defendant twisted through the hallways, desperate and erratic. He collided with doors, sending papers fluttering to the floor and startling courthouse staff who had not yet reached safety. "Stop him!" Collins shouted, his voice carrying authority and urgency. Cato lunged forward, intercepting the man as he twisted to escape through a side corridor. The dog's massive form was a wall of force, yet controlled, enough to halt the defendant without causing serious injury. Avery pressed herself closer, her small hands gripping his thick fur, drawing courage from his presence. The chase moved down a narrow service corridor, lined with maintenance closets and utility doors. The echo of frantic footsteps, shouted commands, and the defendant's panicked breaths created a symphony of chaos that would be etched into the memory of anyone present. Cato's nose twitched as he followed Avery's whispered signals, hunting in on the subtle cues she provided about the suspect's direction and intentions. Collins marveled at the dog's instinctual accuracy. Every step, every pivot, every shift of Cato's massive body was calculated to intercept the man without escalating the danger. The defendant's desperation became more pronounced. He yanked at doors, trying to force an exit, his wild movements betraying a mind in panic. Collins, running beside Cato, knew that this wasn't just a man attempting to flee justice. It was someone cornered by truth, by exposure, and by the incredible bond between a child and a K-9. He motioned for officers to cut off every potential escape route. The courthouse's labyrinthine layout became a strategic advantage in the hands of trained law enforcement. Avery whispered again, her tiny voice almost drowned by the pounding chaos. Cato responded immediately, pivoting sharply toward a stairwell door she had indicated, his growl low and controlled. Collins followed, adrenaline pumping, lungs burning, but his focus unshakable. He signaled to officers stationed near exits to converge, creating an invisible net that would prevent the defendant from eluding capture. Every step mattered. One mistake could turn a controlled pursuit into disaster. The defendant reached a stairwell and shoved the door open violently. He stumbled down the first few steps before regaining his footing and bounding toward the lower level. Cato moved with him, landing perfectly on the landing and accelerating downward, muscles rippling with power and precision. Collins followed closely, issuing rapid-fire commands to the team, who converged from multiple directions to contain the man. The synergy between child, dog, and law enforcement was remarkable. Avery's whispered words, Cato's instincts, and the officer's training had transformed panic into controlled pursuit. The stairwell descended into a dimly lit lower corridor, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly overhead. Shadows danced along the walls as the defendant careened forward, still attempting to find an exit. His movements became more erratic, more desperate. Collins recognized the signs of a man who knew he had been caught, who realized that the game was over. Cato's body tensed further, signaling officers to prepare for final containment. Avery's small whispers guided the dog precisely, her eyes focused and unblinking, her trust absolute. The defendant's gaze flicked toward a service door at the far end of the corridor. He lunged, shoving against the metal, but Cato anticipated the movement, intercepting him with a well-timed block that forced him backward. Collins saw the opportunity and gestured to the officers closing in. Within seconds, The team formed a human barrier around the man, ensuring no further escape. He thrashed, wild-eyed and panicked, but the combination of law enforcement and Kato's precise blocking left him trapped. Avery pressed herself against the dog's side, her small body trembling but safe. Breathing heavily, Collins approached, keeping a protective stance between Avery and the defendant. "You're surrounded," he said firmly. "Drop any weapon and comply." The man's eyes darted around, searching for a way out, realizing with horror that the child's warning and the dog's intervention had rendered him powerless. He dropped the pen he had grabbed, hands trembling as officers moved in to secure him. Kato remained alert, growling softly, ensuring no sudden movements threatened Avery. The chase had ended, not with injury but with precision and courage. Medical staff and additional officers were called to the lower corridor to assist, ensuring the defendant was safely restrained and that Avery remained protected. Collins knelt beside her once more, voice calm but filled with reassurance. "You did it, Avery," he said. "You warned us. You trusted Kato and he protected you. Because of you, everyone is safe." Avery nodded, small fingers brushing the dog's fur, whispering softly, though Collins could not catch the words. Kato's gaze remained on the defendant, alert and watchful, as if ensuring no further threat remained. The courthouse slowly began to return to order. Officers secured the area, checking for any overlooked hazards. The echoes of the chase lingered in the dim corridors, a reminder of the intensity of the events that had just unfolded. Journalists and spectators, previously removed from the front lines of the action, now filtered in, capturing footage and documenting the extraordinary moment of cooperation between child, dog, and law enforcement. Avery, still close to Kato, took a few cautious breaths, her small frame recovering from the adrenaline that had surged through her. Collins offered a gentle smile. "You were brave," he said softly. "You helped save lives. Kato and you together prevented a disaster today." Avery looked up, eyes bright, filled with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She had spoken 2 words, trusted a dog, and altered the course of events. The defendant was escorted back to a secure area, restrained and under constant supervision. Collins and other officers debriefed quickly, ensuring that the scene remained secure and that Avery was protected. The courthouse, once a stage for chaos and panic, slowly returned to normal, though the memory of the chase and the child's bravery would linger in every participant's mind. Even as the adrenaline faded, the impact of the moment became clear. Avery's whispered words had initiated the chain of events that had transformed a dangerous situation into a controlled resolution. The coordination between her, Kato, and law enforcement had prevented potential harm, demonstrating courage, instinct, and trust in a situation that few could have navigated successfully. Collins stayed beside Avery and Kato, offering quiet reassurance. She remained clinging to the dog, whispering softly, her small frame trembling but steady. "You did everything right," Collins said, voice low. "You trusted Kato and he kept you safe. You saved lives today." Avery nodded, her gaze steady, understanding the significance of her role in the events that had unfolded. The lower corridors of the courthouse, once filled with chaos, were now quiet. Officers double-checked the exits, ensuring no further threats remained. Kato remained alert, his presence a protective barrier, while Avery slowly rose, still guided by the dog's calm reassurance. The impact of the chase, the precision, the coordination, and the courage displayed, was already beginning to resonate throughout the courthouse. In that tense moment, it became clear to every observer. The child's 2 whispered words had not only prevented immediate danger, but had also demonstrated the extraordinary potential of trust, instinct, and partnership between humans and animals. Avery's bravery, coupled with Kato's training and the officer's discipline, had transformed a chaotic pursuit into a model of controlled, heroic action. As the courthouse began to settle, Collins knelt beside Avery one final time. "Remember this," he said gently. "What you did today was extraordinary. You were brave and you trusted Kato. That trust saved lives. Never forget that." Avery's small voice whispered back, barely audible, "Kato understood me. He always does." Collins smiled, recognizing the profound bond between the child and the dog, a bond that had transformed fear into triumph. And in that dimly lit corridor, the echoes of the chase faded, leaving behind the memory of courage, instinct, and extraordinary bravery. Avery had spoken 2 words, and those words had sparked a chain of events that no one in the courthouse would ever forget. The courthouse had returned to a fragile calm, but the tension lingered like a low hum beneath the polished floors. Officers moved efficiently, clearing hallways and ensuring Avery's safety, yet the echoes of the chaotic chase still resonated through the building. Every spectator, every staff member, understood that something extraordinary had just occurred. A child's whispered words and a dog's instinct had prevented a disaster, and now the courthouse itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Avery sat beside Kato in a small secured room near the judge's chambers, her tiny hands brushing his thick fur. She was still trembling, adrenaline slowly draining from her body, yet her gaze remained sharp, attentive, as though the danger had never fully left. Collins knelt beside her, voice calm but filled with reassurance. "You did exactly what we needed, Avery," he said softly. "You trusted Kato and he protected you. You helped save lives today." Avery's fingers twitched over the dog's collar, and she whispered something so quiet that even Collins had to lean in to catch it. "He was lying," she murmured, her wide eyes fixed on Kato's steady gaze. Collins' heart skipped a beat. Those 2 words, innocent sounding to an untrained ear, carried the weight of confirmation. Avery had just identified the core of the threat, the truth that no one had yet uncovered. The defendant's panic, his erratic behavior, and the chaos of the chase were not merely random acts of desperation. They were fueled by a hidden secret, one that the child had detected instinctively, and now, through Kato's interpretation, the truth was poised to come to light. Collins straightened, signaling for officers to secure the room. They stepped back but maintained a perimeter, ensuring Avery and Kato were shielded from anyone who might attempt to interfere. Collins looked toward the judge, who had been observing through a nearby window. The judge nodded subtly, granting Collins the authority to proceed cautiously. Every step now required precision. The truth Avery had uncovered could be explosive, and they had to handle it with care. The officers guided the defendant into a secure room nearby, his hands cuffed and demeanor subdued but still simmering with panic and defiance. Collins took a deep breath, aware that the next phase was critical. Avery's whispered words, "He was lying," had identified the deception, but proving it required strategic, careful interrogation. Collins and his team had to ensure the safety of all, maintain legal integrity, and unravel the web of lies that had brought them here. Avery remained beside Kato, who seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. The dog's low growl had faded into a quiet hum of alertness, his eyes trained on the door leading to the defendant. Collins knelt beside the child, whispering, "Do you want to tell me more about what he was lying about?" Avery nodded, small lips pressing together as she took a deep breath. Slowly, in fragments, she began to recount details only she had witnessed, memories of events so precise that Collins felt chills run down his spine. The courtroom drama, the chaotic chase, and the defendant's panic had all been symptoms of a larger deception. Avery described instances she had observed, subtle lies, dangerous choices, moments of manipulation that had gone unnoticed by adults. Her small voice trembled as she spoke, yet each word carried clarity and conviction. Collins listened intently, taking mental notes, cross-referencing with known facts and evidence. The child's perception, combined with Kato's training, had unveiled truths that no investigation alone might have revealed. Once the account was complete, Collins stood, signaling to officers that it was time to confront the defendant. He led Avery and Kato to a room adjacent to the secured area. The defendant, seated and restrained, looked up with a mixture of defiance and fear. Collins' voice was firm but measured. "We know the truth now," he said. "Avery's words and observations, confirmed by Kato's response, show that you've been lying. It's time to answer for what you've done." The man's eyes flickered, the first signs of real fear appearing. He realized that the child's intuition and the dog's precision had stripped away his control. He opened his mouth to speak, but the weight of exposure held him silent. Avery remained close to Kato, whispering softly. The dog shifted slightly, body tense, ready to respond to any sudden movement, his presence both protective and commanding. Collins continued carefully, ensuring that the confrontation remained controlled. "You have an opportunity to tell the truth," he said firmly. "Your lies are no longer hidden, and your actions have consequences. It's time to be honest." The defendant's hands twitched in his cuffs, and his jaw tightened. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his breathing shallow and rapid. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the small girl he had underestimated held the power to expose him fully. Avery's whispers grew firmer. "He said it wasn't his fault," she murmured, referring to a prior incident that had been a critical turning point in the investigation. Kato's low growl responded, affirming the significance of the statement. Collins, interpreting the dog's signals, knew that this revelation would be pivotal in unraveling the defendant's lies. It was more than a simple contradiction. It was proof of deliberate deception, the kind that could sway both law enforcement and the court. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, realizing the depth of exposure. Collins pressed further, maintaining control. "The truth is clear," he said. "We have confirmation from multiple sources, Avery, Kato, and evidence corroborating her observations. You can continue to lie, or you can take responsibility. Your choice." The man's gaze flickered between Avery and the dog, the gravity of the moment settling heavily upon him. Avery's whispers continued, subtle but precise. She recounted actions, phrases, and moments that the defendant had tried to conceal. Kato's responses were immediate, controlled, and precise, affirming each detail. Collins watched in awe as the child and the dog operated in perfect harmony, revealing truths that had remained hidden until this extraordinary moment. The defendant's composure finally broke. His shoulders slumped, hands curling around the cuffs. For the first time he spoke, voice low and shaky. I didn't mean for anything to happen," he muttered. The confession was hesitant, fragmented, yet undeniable. Collins and the officers listened carefully, ready to intervene if necessary, but the presence of Avery and Kato ensured that the statements were genuine, truthful, and complete. As the confession unfolded, Collins realized the profound significance of what had occurred. Avery's trust in Kato, her courage, and her ability to perceive truths that adults had overlooked had transformed the course of the investigation. The dog's response had confirmed her observations, creating an unbroken chain of evidence and intuition. It was a testament to the power of instinct, trust, and bravery, qualities that transcended age and circumstance. By the time the confession concluded, the defendant was visibly defeated, aware that the child's two whispered words had initiated a chain of events that could not be reversed. Avery remained kneeling beside Kato, calm now but alert, her whispers soft but filled with certainty. Collins felt a deep respect for the child and the dog, recognizing that their unique bond had prevented disaster and revealed the truth in a way that no ordinary investigation could. Officers documented the confession, ensuring that all statements were recorded accurately. Avery was gently guided back to the secured room with Kato, where she could process the events under protective supervision. Collins remained close, offering reassurance. "You did it," he said quietly. "Your bravery and trust helped everyone today. The truth is out and justice will follow." Avery nodded, small hands still resting on Kato's fur, eyes reflecting both relief and pride. The courthouse, though still humming with activity, had regained a sense of control. The chaos of the chase and the threat posed by the defendant were resolved, but the impact of Avery's two whispered words and Kato's instinctual response lingered. Law enforcement officers, the judge, and even the remaining staff understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A child, a dog, and instinct had exposed a web of lies and prevented potential harm. Collins took a final moment to reflect. He knelt beside Avery one last time, voice gentle. "Remember this," he said. "What you did today was extraordinary. You trusted Kato and that trust saved lives. Never forget that. Avery's eyes, wide and clear, met his with understanding. He understood me, she whispered. He always does. Collins smiled, recognizing the profound bond that had guided the events of the day, a bond that had ensured truth and safety prevailed. The day's events would be remembered, retold, and studied for years to come. Avery's courage, the dog's instinct, and the precise coordination of law enforcement had created a story of bravery, trust, and extraordinary perception. In the quiet moments that followed, as officers secured the courthouse and ensured the safety of all, the significance of Avery's two whispered words became clear. A child's insight, paired with instinct and trust, had changed the course of events forever. And in that small, sunlit room with Kato by her side, Avery realized that even the smallest voice could carry immense power, and that courage, trust, and perception, no matter the age of the messenger, could unveil the truth, protect the innocent, and ensure justice prevailed. The courthouse buzzed with a cautious energy as the trial reconvened. Reporters whispered excitedly, lawyers adjusted their notes, and spectators eyed each other with a mix of curiosity and lingering tension. The defendant, still visibly shaken from his earlier exposure and confession, sat at the table, hands cuffed, demeanor subdued but eyes darting nervously. Avery, seated beside Kato in a secure area at the front, watched intently, her small hands resting on the dog's thick fur. The bond between child and dog was palpable, radiating calm yet unmistakable authority that seemed to permeate the room. Sergeant Collins stepped forward, scanning the courtroom with a measured gaze. He understood that what was about to unfold was delicate. Avery's observations and Kato's instincts had exposed the truth, but the court needed a formal, controlled presentation. Collins took a deep breath, acknowledging that this moment required both precision and subtlety. Every movement mattered, every word weighed heavily in the balance between justice and chaos. The judge adjusted his robes, eyes fixed on Collins. "Proceed with caution," he instructed. "Ensure the courtroom remains orderly and that the child is protected." Collins nodded, signaling officers to tighten the perimeter while maintaining discretion. Avery leaned into Kato, whispering softly, as if providing him reassurance before the next stage. Kato's low growl vibrated faintly, a controlled signal of readiness. He was not just a protector, he was a participant in the pursuit of truth. Collins began by addressing the court, his voice firm but calm. "Your Honor, Avery has provided critical information regarding the defendant's prior actions, supported and confirmed by Kato's responses. The details she observed, previously concealed, have been validated and are now presented for formal consideration." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. A 7-year-old child had become a pivotal witness in exposing deception and preventing potential harm. Every spectator leaned forward, drawn to the extraordinary scenario unfolding. The attorneys exchanged hurried whispers. Defense counsel's composed facade faltered slightly as the courtroom absorbed the magnitude of Avery's role. The prosecution, meanwhile, prepared to integrate her observations into a structured narrative, one that could withstand scrutiny and emphasize the truth she had unveiled. Avery remained composed, small hands still clutching Kato's fur, eyes unwavering as she scanned the room, seemingly aware of the attention and gravity surrounding her. The judge spoke, voice steady yet intrigued. "Miss Avery, please recount your observations for the court." Avery's lips pressed together briefly, then parted as she whispered, her voice small but firm. She recounted events with clarity, describing subtle lies, manipulations, and dangerous actions by the defendant. Each detail was precise, woven together logically, revealing the deception with startling accuracy. The courtroom was captivated. Journalists leaned forward, scribbling notes frantically, while spectators watched in awe. Kato responded in tandem, body language and subtle growls affirming the child's statements. Collins interpreted, subtly conveying confirmation without disrupting courtroom procedure. The combination of Avery's account and Kato's instincts created an unassailable impression. The child's words carried truth, and the dog's reactions corroborated her observations. The defendant's composure began to crumble further, fingers drumming nervously against the table as he realized the courtroom now fully comprehended the depth of his deception. Collins motioned discreetly to officers stationed near exits, ensuring the defendant remained contained while minimizing alarm. Avery continued, describing incidents with precision, contradictions in prior statements, inconsistencies in testimony, and behaviors that revealed intent and malice. Each statement was met with subtle affirmations from Cotto, whose posture and low, measured growls underscored the seriousness of the revelations. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, absorbing every word, every gesture, every nuance. The prosecution summarized, carefully integrating Avery's observations and Cotto's corroboration. "Your Honor," the lead attorney stated, "this testimony establishes not only prior deception, but a pattern of behavior critical to understanding the defendant's actions. The child's insight, confirmed through Cotto, provides clarity that evidence alone could not achieve." The weight of the statement hung in the room, a reminder that truth sometimes emerges in unexpected forms, through courage, instinct, and unshakable perception. The defense counsel attempted to counter, questioning Avery gently, seeking to undermine her credibility. "Are you sure of what you saw, Avery?" the attorney asked, voice careful. Avery's small head tilted slightly, eyes never leaving the defendant or Cotto. "Yes," she whispered, unwavering. Cotto responded with a low growl, alert but controlled, as if reinforcing her truth. Collins watched the interaction, impressed by the child's composure and the dog's impeccable timing. The bond between them had become a silent but unbreakable force, commanding attention without words. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, realizing his strategies to manipulate perception were failing. Each whispered truth from Avery, each subtle affirmation from Cotto, eroded the carefully constructed facade he had maintained. The courtroom's energy was charged. Spectators leaned forward, attorneys whispered under their breath, and even the judge seemed absorbed by the unfolding narrative. The child's courage had transformed the room into a stage of revelation, tension, and moral reckoning. Collins approached Avery quietly, whispering a small reminder. "Stay calm, Avery. You're doing perfectly." Avery nodded subtly, fingers brushing Cotto's fur as she whispered further insights. Each observation was precise, shedding light on actions the defendant had hoped would remain hidden. The combination of child, dog, and law enforcement had created an unstoppable chain, unraveling deception with a clarity and power that resonated through the entire room. The judge adjusted his glasses, reviewing notes as Avery concluded her account. "Thank you, Miss Avery," he said, voice steady but respectful. "Your observations are taken seriously and will be fully considered. The court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances under which this testimony was provided." The weight of official recognition settled in the room, a formal acknowledgement of the child's pivotal role. Avery exhaled softly, leaning into Cotto, a quiet sense of relief washing over her. Collins guided the child back slightly, ensuring she remained protected while officers prepared to continue the formal proceedings. The defendant's face had paled further, realization dawning fully that his deception was now exposed beyond repair. The courtroom felt charged with anticipation, as if the moment of revelation, the culmination of trust, courage, and instinct, was reaching its peak. Every participant understood that Avery's two whispered words had transformed not just the pursuit of truth, but the very nature of justice being served. The prosecution called for a final summary, integrating Avery's testimony, Cotto's confirmation, and the evidence already collected. "Your Honor," the attorney stated, "this case demonstrates the power of observation, courage, and instinct. Avery's insight, supported by Cotto, has illuminated the truth where conventional methods could not. The defendant's actions are now clear, and justice must reflect the extraordinary clarity provided by this unique collaboration." Murmurs of agreement spread through the courtroom. The defense attorney, recognizing the impossibility of undermining such a coordinated revelation, fell silent, shoulders slumping subtly. The defendant's defeat was now undeniable. The courtroom's energy had shifted irreversibly. Avery remained seated beside Kato, her small hands resting on his fur, eyes focused and steady. She had spoken 2 words, and those words had cascaded into a sequence that exposed the truth fully, ensuring that justice would prevail. The judge, voice calm but firm, addressed the room. This court acknowledges the courage, insight, and extraordinary circumstances that have brought clarity to these proceedings. The testimony provided by Miss Avery, corroborated through Kato's responses, has revealed critical truths. The court will take these revelations into full consideration as proceedings continue. The room seemed to exhale collectively, a tension that had gripped every observer now easing into awe and relief. Collins knelt beside Avery once more, offering quiet reassurance. "You did it, Avery. You spoke the truth, trusted Kato, and helped uncover what was hidden. You've changed the outcome today." Avery's small head nodded, fingers brushing Kato's fur as she whispered softly. The dog's alert posture remained, protective yet calm, a living symbol of the extraordinary bond that had guided the events. As the courtroom settled, the significance of Avery's role became undeniable. She had spoken 2 words, seemingly simple yet charged with truth and courage. Kato had responded with instinct and precision, reinforcing the child's observations. Together, they had transformed a complex, tense, and dangerous situation into a moment of clarity, revelation, and moral triumph. The courtroom had witnessed the extraordinary power of trust, perception, and bravery, qualities that transcended age, size, and expectation. Officers and courtroom staff quietly reflected on what had occurred, aware that this was a story that would be remembered for years. Avery's bravery, combined with Kato's instinct and the disciplined response of law enforcement, had created an unparalleled demonstration of courage and truth. The child's whispered words had revealed deception, guided action, and ultimately ensured justice would prevail in a way that would be studied and recounted for generations. Collins offered a final nod of reassurance to Avery. "You were brave and you trusted Kato. That trust saved lives and revealed the truth. Never forget the power of your words and your courage." Avery's eyes, wide and shining, met his with understanding. "He understood me," she whispered, voice firm. "He always does." Kato shifted slightly, growling softly, affirming the bond that had transformed the trial, the chase, and the pursuit of truth. The day's events had reached a climax, yet the final impact was just beginning to resonate. Avery's 2 words, seemingly simple yet profoundly courageous, had initiated a chain of events that reshaped the courtroom's understanding of truth, deception, and the extraordinary bond between a child and a dog. Every participant, from judge to officer to spectator, would carry the memory of this day as a testament to bravery, trust, and the power of instinct in the pursuit of justice. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Avery sat beside Kato, small fingers intertwined with his thick fur, her wide eyes absorbing every detail. The defendant, finally subdued and exposed, slouched in his chair, the weight of his lies and the truth he had tried to hide pressing down upon him. Collins stood nearby, vigilant, knowing that while the immediate danger had passed, the courtroom's tension still hummed, waiting for the judge's final decisions. Every person present understood that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. A young child and a trained K-9 had changed the course of events in ways no one could have anticipated. The judge, adjusting his glasses, addressed the courtroom with measured authority. "Today, this court has witnessed an exceptional demonstration of courage, intuition, and truth. Miss Avery's testimony, corroborated by Kato, has illuminated the facts in a manner that no ordinary evidence could achieve. Her observations were precise, unwavering, and instrumental in revealing the defendant's actions." The words echoed through the room, and a subtle murmur of awe swept over the spectators. Avery shifted slightly, drawing Kato closer, feeling the warmth of his presence as reassurance. Collins moved subtly to ensure Avery's safety as the judge continued. "The defendant's prior statements and behaviors have been carefully reviewed in light of the testimony provided. It is clear that deception, manipulation, and dangerous decisions occurred. This court acknowledges the critical role played by a minor witness and a trained K-9 officer in uncovering the truth and preventing further harm. The words struck a chord, emphasizing the magnitude of Avery's bravery and the dog's precision. Even seasoned law enforcement officers exchanged quiet, impressed glances. The defendant's attorney attempted to speak, seeking to mitigate the situation, but the courtroom's energy had shifted irreversibly. The evidence, combined with Avery's testimony and Cato's confirmed responses, left little room for argument. The attorney's words faltered, drowned by the weight of the truth that had emerged. Collins watched closely, ensuring that the defendant remained contained, aware that even small gestures of defiance could escalate tension. But the man, overwhelmed by exposure, remained silent, realizing that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Avery's whispers, small but deliberate, were audible only to Collins as he knelt beside her. "We did it, Cato," she murmured softly. The dog's low, controlled growl seemed to affirm her statement, a gentle rumble of satisfaction and vigilance. Collins smiled quietly, recognizing the extraordinary partnership between child and canine. The trust, courage, and instinct that had guided them through the courthouse chase, the confrontation, and now the courtroom revelation had changed the narrative entirely. The judge paused, reviewing notes carefully. Given the defendant's confession, the corroborating observations, and the extraordinary circumstances of this case, this court finds substantial evidence to proceed with formal sentencing. Justice will reflect not only the defendant's actions, but also the courage and insight demonstrated by a minor witness, whose contribution was instrumental in ensuring safety and truth. A hush settled over the room as the gravity of the statement sank in. Avery's two whispered words, so simple, yet so profound, had catalyzed this chain of events. Collins guided Avery to stand, allowing her to witness the court's acknowledgement firsthand. Spectators leaned forward, captivated by the young girl whose insight had reshaped the proceedings. Cato remained alert, muscles coiled, protective, yet calm, responding subtly to Avery's gentle touch. The bond between child and dog, now fully visible to everyone present, symbolized courage, instinct, and trust in its purest form. The courtroom was no longer just a venue for legal proceedings. It had become a stage for extraordinary bravery and moral clarity. The prosecution presented the final evidence, methodically laying out the defendant's pattern of deception, manipulation, and dangerous choices. Avery's testimony was referenced repeatedly, each time highlighting her precision, awareness, and the role of her trust in Cato. The court absorbed every detail, understanding that the outcome had been shaped not solely by documentation or witness statements, but by instinct, perception, and courage. Collins felt a swell of pride and relief, recognizing that Avery's small voice had held immense power. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, realization dawning fully. His prior confidence, built on manipulation and concealment, had dissolved. Every word Avery had whispered, every subtle signal from Cato, had dismantled the carefully constructed facade he had relied upon. The courtroom's attention, the judge's acknowledgement, and the officer's disciplined presence left him fully exposed. Collins observed silently, ensuring that the defendant remained contained, while appreciating the profound impact of the child-dog partnership that had guided justice to this moment. The judge, voice firm, addressed the defendant directly. "The court recognizes the seriousness of your actions. You were confronted with truth through extraordinary means. Your choices have consequences. This court will ensure that justice is served appropriately, in recognition of the courage and insight demonstrated by those who exposed your deception." The statement carried weight, a reminder that truth, no matter how hidden, has a way of emerging. The defendant lowered his head, the magnitude of his exposure undeniable. Avery remained composed, small hands resting on Cato's fur, eyes bright but calm. Collins knelt beside her, voice quiet but filled with reassurance. "You were brave," he whispered. You trusted Kato and your courage helped everyone. The truth is out and justice will follow. You made a difference today." Avery nodded, her gaze steady, whispering softly to the dog. "We did it, Kato. We did it together." Kato's low rumble seemed to affirm her statement, a reminder that instinct, trust, and courage had guided them through every danger. The courtroom slowly began to settle. Spectators, officers, and journalists reflected on the extraordinary sequence of events. Avery's bravery, Kato's precision, and the coordinated response of law enforcement had not only prevented harm, but also revealed truths that might otherwise have remained concealed. Collins allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, acknowledging that what had unfolded was unprecedented. A young child and a dog had altered the course of justice through courage, trust, and perception. The judge concluded the session, outlining the next steps for formal sentencing and legal proceedings. The court will review all evidence, testimonies, and extraordinary circumstances before issuing a ruling. The bravery of Miss Avery and the confirmation provided by Kato will be formally recognized and will factor into the proceedings accordingly. The courtroom absorbed the statement in stunned silence, a collective understanding dawning that this was a moment that transcended ordinary trials. Collins guided Avery and Kato toward a quiet hallway away from the bustling courtroom. "You did something incredible today," he said gently. "You spoke the truth, trusted Kato, and helped protect everyone. That takes courage most adults could never achieve." Avery's small face glowed with pride and she whispered softly, "He understood me, Collins. He always does." Kato shifted slightly, nuzzling her hand, his presence both protective and affirming. The bond between them had proven unbreakable, a silent partnership that had guided events from chaos to resolution. Outside the courtroom, the media waited, eager to capture the story. Collins carefully allowed a controlled moment for recognition. Avery and Kato's extraordinary courage, the child's perceptive insights, and the dog's instinct had captivated everyone present. Reporters whispered and jotted notes frantically, understanding that this was not merely a story of crime and justice, but a narrative of bravery, trust, and extraordinary collaboration. Avery's two whispered words had become legendary in that moment, embodying truth and courage. As the courthouse doors closed behind the last of the spectators, Collins reflected on the day's events. Avery's courage, Kato's precision, and the officers' disciplined coordination had prevented disaster, revealed hidden truths, and transformed fear into clarity. Every participant understood that they had witnessed something rare, a demonstration of bravery and instinct that transcended ordinary expectations. The child's small voice had guided action, and the dog's trained instincts had ensured safety and truth prevailed. Avery leaned into Kato, whispering softly, "We saved everyone, Kato, together." The dog's low growl vibrated gently, an affirmation of partnership, loyalty, and trust. Collins stood quietly beside them, acknowledging the profound impact of the bond that had changed the course of events. The courthouse, once a stage of chaos and fear, now held an atmosphere of reflection, awe, and recognition. Justice had been served not only through law but through courage, instinct, and unshakable trust. The day ended with Avery receiving formal recognition for her bravery. The judge personally commended her, highlighting the extraordinary circumstances and the pivotal role she had played. Kato, too, was acknowledged, his calm and precise actions instrumental in ensuring the safety of all and confirming Avery's insights. The courtroom had witnessed a convergence of courage, perception, and instinct, an event that would be remembered, studied, and recounted for years. As evening settled over the courthouse, Avery and Kato walked slowly through the quiet halls, Collins by their side. The adrenaline of the day had ebbed, replaced by a reflective calm. Avery whispered softly to Kato, fingers brushing his fur. "We did it, just like we always do." The dog nudged her gently, a silent promise of continued loyalty and protection. Collins smiled quietly, understanding that the extraordinary events of the day had forged an unbreakable bond and demonstrated that even the smallest voices, guided by courage and trust, could change the world. And so, in that quiet courthouse, under the fading light of day, the story concluded, not with chaos or fear, but with truth, justice, and the extraordinary courage of a child and her loyal dog. Avery's two whispered words had revealed the hidden, guided action in the face of danger, and ensured that justice in its truest sense had been served.